Welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery, brought to you by spiritualteachers.org. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. Welcome to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I want to start off with this episode by just mentioning that the TAT Foundation will be having its April gathering, April 25th through the 27th. That is titled The Way of Truth. The location will be in Charlestown, West Virginia, which is only about an hour away from DC. So for those of you who have found the TAP meetings in North Carolina perhaps to be a little inconvenient, here's an opportunity to catch one that might be closer to home for you. There will be 3 speakers at the meeting: Paul Resendez, Dave Weimer, and Bob Cergol. Bob Cergol is actually my guest for this edition. He has a new book out. It's called Hope, Life's Calling, and Bob will be signing copies of this book at the meeting. So that's yet another reason to try to make it there. If you want to find out more about that event, go to tatfoundation.org. There's an events button, and then you'll see a banner image for the April 2025 TAT meeting, The Way of Truth. Hope you can make it. So, welcome, Bob. It's
Hello,
good
Sean.
to have you on the show again. I can't believe it, but you were on episode 2 of this podcast, which was 9 years ago.
Oh my.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So if you're clever, you would look up the questions you asked me. Ask me the same questions to see if I give you the same answers.
I'm afraid I'm not that clever, Bob.
Maybe you
I'll
could
let everyone down. But I do recommend that people go back and check out that episode. It talks a lot about your background, a lot about your experience, and I'm going to try to stay away from that material at least a bit and recommend that people check out that older episode to get the full story, let's say, of your spiritual path and your spiritual enlightenment experience. And I really wanted to focus on your book, Hope, Life's Calling, which is available on Amazon, and you can order it through your local booksellers as well, however you want to get it. It's on Kindle, and I believe there's even an audio version now available on Amazon. So it's out there. I recommend that people pick it up, read it. Uh, and yeah, I have a few questions about the book, and then we'll see where we go on this conversation. And the first question is really about the title of the book, Hope. Title of the book, the first sentence of the introduction talks about hope. And could you just tell the listeners a little bit about what you see as the role of hope in the spiritual search?
Yeah. I think hope is really our um, is the driving force in our life. It's what I think the way we live our lives. It's an expression of hope. You know, we arrive in this world and we develop a sense of self. We we feel alive as us in this world, but we don't know who or what that is. We don't truly know who we are. We don't know what it means to be what our role in the world is. And as a young person, we hope to find out. We don't consciously think to ourselves, that, oh, I hope the hope is not a conscious thing to us, I don't believe. Although as a child being raised Catholic, I was taught that hope was one of the 3 virtues: faith, hope, and charity, if I'm remembering that right. But that didn't mean all that much to me as a child. Um, the title actually came from the fact that some old group members who lost hope. They committed suicide. And I wasn't particularly close to those people, but I knew them. I corresponded with one of them, and so got to know him a little bit. But obviously, it's a tragedy, and when you encounter that with somebody you actually knew, it's just really kind of shocking, and really, you ask yourself, well, why? What happened? How could they be that hopeless? And I had been wanting to write a book for quite a while and wasn't, was getting a slow start to it. And I was talking to Arnima, or I think I was trading emails with Arnima, and she egged me on. She said, "Bob, you have to do it. Do it for them. You do it for them and other young seekers." So I think that's what the initial idea, what put the idea in my head. Yeah, I'll title it Hope. And the life's calling came after that because life is calling us. It's seducing us to lose ourselves, and we kind of get lost in life. We're so busy living our life and busy trying to become somebody, and then too busy being that buddy. Um, and we get lost. So life's calling us into living life, but at the same time, I feel like there's a much deeper calling. It's an in our it comes from our heart, it comes from our source, and it really is the source of our spiritual desires. So that was the kind of the play on words for that title. And getting back to this, the theme of the book really is tied up in this basic idea of self-definition, that the fundamental human problem is one of self-definition. We need to define ourselves. And depending on how successful we are at that, or if we fail at it, we can lose hope in life. We can lose confidence in our own capacity to live our life, and lose hope. And for some people, it results in suicide. So I don't know. That wasn't a very good answer, I feel, but hope is so central to everything. You hope to wake up tomorrow. You hope to live a long, productive life. You hope to achieve everything that you hope to fulfill all your desires. You hope to be loved. And on one level, hope is actually very, very self-centered, and selfish. Our hopes are egocentric. But there's an underlying current to that. Current may be the wrong word. There's a part of us that is eternal, and using the phrase "part of us" is not exactly correct, but another way to say it was we abide within something. Something precedes us, and this inner calling manifests in our consciousness, but we don't hear it. We aren't. We're so distracted. Our attention is so turned around, or outward focused, that we aren't paying attention to it until something goes wrong. Until something throws us back on ourselves. We have some setback. It might be a physical injury, it might be a loss of a job, it might be getting into an argument with somebody, but something that causes emotional pain throws us back on ourselves, and that's when people react differently. But I believe most people at some point in their life have certain setbacks that cause them to be reflective. And in those moments of self-reflection, they might be able to hear this inner hope, this call. It's you don't even the hope wouldn't be the word that you would use for it. It's felt. It's more of a feeling than a. It's not a conceptual perception or witnessing. Um, it's a calling. You feel there's something's calling you home, something calling you to pay attention to something that's more permanent, as opposed to all the fleeting experiences that are rushing your way. So I don't know. I didn't give it a lot of thought to the title. It just seemed I knew that after this conversation with Arnhem that yeah, I'll come and call it Hope. And then the other concept behind the book was for years I've been talking about afflictions to the sense of self and how what are we focused on at any moment? What are we looking at? Um, we're there's this fire hose of experience coming our way, and there's this knife's edge in our attention that instantaneously everything coming at us is either affirms us or diminishes us. And we look away from experiences that diminish us because what we're trying to I mean, obviously the body's trying to preserve itself, but the ego, let's use that word for talking, the ego needs to preserve itself as well. And the method of preservation, well, part of preserving something is both body and ego is a growth. So the body, you take in food and it grows, right? And the body will automatically avoid injury, try to keep the body intact. Well, the ego does the same way, the same thing. The ego, food for the ego are positive experiences, reinforcing experiences. Just what we were talking about your dog earlier. Not that whether your dog has an ego or not. Well, that's another conversation. But you pat him, you praise him when he does his tells you he needs to go outside to do his business, and that reinforces him. And that's the same thing with human beings. They get this personality, this sense of I evolves and out of experience in the body. So anything that is reaffirms and magnifies that sense of individuality you look at, you're drawn to, and anything that diminishes it or threatens it, you look away from. So anyway, I've been talking about that for years and making the point that when you in a brief moment when your head is stopped because of some diminishment, before you instantly spin that diminishment into something positive, like when you have a fight with somebody and the thoughts come rushing in and you start rationalizing. You spin things in a certain direction. That direction is always one of self-justification, self-affirmation. But in a split second before that process kicks in, you're kind of stuck. What are you looking at in that moment? I think in that split second, maybe it's even call it a timeless moment, you have a direct channel back into your source, seeing what you are and what what drives your sense of being alive as you. Anyway, I've been talking about that stuff for decades, and I feel like nobody gets it. The diagram in this book on the object of attention diagram, and it shows the inner experience, external experience, and inner experience, external movie, internal movie. I'm pretty sure nobody knows what I'm talking about because that's been published on the TAP website for many, many years. And nobody's ever written me, I shouldn't say nobody, but if I've gotten 2 letters over 20 years with questions on it. So anyway, I thought, all right, I'm going to see if I can write something that will get into a lot of detail and paint a picture on a more practical level that people can kind of get a sense of how this happens. And so that led me to this idea of the stages of life. So I have I defined 12 stages of life from um, birth through death, and kind of detail the experiences and each stage has a theme, has some characteristics, and then there's an agenda for most of them.
Well, let me ask you. dive into a couple of those points a little bit. Years ago, you mentioned a potential practice, which was that when you wake up, you described it as you wake up, you're trying to remember a dream,
Yeah, yeah, I remember.
trying to get the feeling of the dream. Is that sounded like what you just now described as kind of like I think you said the mind on
You could call it dead
focusing
center,
or
or
pause, something like that. Is that the same
it's
exercise?
yeah, yeah, you could say that. You could say them. It's completely different words, and the atmospherics, if you will, around it are completely different. Um, yeah, because in the where the similarity is that sometimes you'll have a dream that you have you wake up and you remember I just had a dream, and it feels like it was really important. Something about it seemed important. It wasn't just another run-of-the-mill dream. And so you're kind of locked in on, well, what was that? What was it about? What did it mean? And what's this feeling? And while you're doing that, you're slowly waking up. And as you're waking up, the dream is kind of dissolving and eluding you. It's hard to remember dreams. Um, so you're this is the experience I've had with trying to do this anyway. So you're locked in, your attention is locked in single pointedly on trying to hold on to what the content and the feeling of the dream. Usually the feeling aspect is more significant or more important than the content. The content is just how it got translated visually, or for your mind. Um, but at some point that you can't hang on anymore and it just disappears. And when that happens, but your attention doesn't cease the moment that you lose the memory of that of the dream itself. So for a moment, you're still staring at something. And I say that what the direction you're staring in at that moment is inward. And by inward, I mean towards the source, in the direction of from whence you came, as opposed to the mirror, which is experiences that are reflecting, so that's all external. So a dream is kind of straddling the two worlds, I guess. Um, yeah.
Do you
I,
think that you were we were talking about hope and the feeling of hope, and you talked about how we all have the experience of being hopeful, right? And hoping for the best, and hope springs eternal, and we get knocked down and we get up again for some reason. There's that hope, but then I think you were alluding to that there's perhaps a deeper hope that's connected with something eternal about us. Do you think that looking at the feeling of hope itself, like could there be some value to that, observing that in ourselves, that feeling of, I hesitate to call it optimism, but that there's something, like there's a reason, there's
well, yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's accurate to say that to use the word hope, that you're actually looking at hope. I don't know that you can look at hope as an object. Um, I think hope is something we have. We hope to get things, but there's a part of us that wants to go home, and maybe that part um, is pulling you in that direction. I don't know that you could call that hope. Um, I feel I've been going to tap meetings for many decades, right? And I've seen, I don't know, hundreds of people come and go through the doors. And a small subset of those people have come for many, many years. But a lot of people, come once or several times and then you don't see them. Um, and the meetings that most of those meetings they've come to, there's been a lot of talking going on. There's people read books and they come to these retreat events. And on a TAT meeting weekend, there's presentations and a lot of talk. I mean, there's a lot more. There's profound things going on, but I get the sense that most people that go to events like that, they go because they they would deny this consciously because they're too sophisticated to think this way. But I feel that really what if they're honest with themselves, they're operating on the assumption that they can be talked into this. You know, that there's some uh, prize, you know, some special thing that can be added to them, or that you know that they can, you know, grow their consciousness, have an expanded consciousness. You know, I don't know what that means. It's kind of it's an ego centric thing that people think that they're going to expand their consciousness. Um, I remember Rose joking one time that, yeah, you know, people talk about this, and my God, that we just better hope that, you know, their consciousness will expand so large that God Himself will have to move out of the way to make room for it. But I mean, you can't be talked into realization, and you no one's going to drift into realization. I see this in my own, you know, this is my own path, and then many people I've met over the years that have had realizations, big and small, final, you know, incomplete or complete. And I learn their story, even if they themselves interpret their story differently and then come up with a different idea about what other people should do to have the same thing. I see a common denominator in those stories, and all of them involve some, you know, tension where there was they had a strong commitment to wanting to find the answer, to define themselves beyond what they saw in the mirror and what other people looked at in the external world. And maybe they couldn't articulate that very well, but because it was an inner yearning or inner drive that they had. So they had that. And maybe some didn't know how to go about doing anything with that. I mean, you know, the range of responses might be, some people will sign, you know, travel around, you know, go to the other side of the planet to live with a teacher, or go on retreats. One guy I knew, he was a truck driver, and so he had a lot of time to drive, and he would just think, and, you know, try to noodle out questions about like life and death and who was he and all that. But so they had this started this commitment to finding an answer, and then they took action on some level to do it, and then they had some tension, you know, in their lives that came to a head, and, you know, cracked their head open, so to speak. And for some it was, you know, there would be a scale of this from gentle to, you know, extreme. And in the case of Richard Rose's realization experience, in which he wrote about in 3 books of the Absolute, I mean, it's like a epic, really dramatic thing, you know. So he called it a death experience. So it was very dramatic, and but other people, maybe it's not so dramatic. I mean, it's more of it's like they wake up and they know something which they can't articulate, but they got to that point because something did an end run around the ego. Alfred Pullian, who was a Zen master that Rose corresponded with, and whose letters I read, and um, he wrote somewhere in one of the letters that the only way to reach realization was to abandon the egocentric position. Well, the paradox or the conundrum there is, you can't abandon the egocentric position. I mean, that's a volitional act. That's ego driven. So if ego is going to abandon it, the ego's saying, "Hey, I want this reward, so I'm going to abandon the egocentric position." Well, no, it doesn't work that way. So some degree of tension wears the ego down, or softens it up, so to speak. And so when there's this, after a certain momentum of attention in a certain direction, it's a good one I should have come back to earlier, that this, from in my view, a spiritual path, is boils down to developing an inward vector of the attention, an inward momentum of the attention. And in contrast to your attention being wholly focused on external experience and ego reinforcing experience. So the reason this momentum is so important is because when this tension, your commitment, a person's commitment to a spiritual path, and trying to live that commitment will generate tension in their life. I mean, ordinary life generates tension for everybody, but most people dissipate the attention by, zoning out in front of the TV or drinking alcohol or whatever their diversion is. But if you develop develop a practice of looking at yourself in the world, in the external world, and looking at your inner world. And then, as part of that practice, looking at silence, that will build this momentum of a direction of looking, so that when the sooner or later this tension will build to a certain point where something very unexpected out of the blue, could be something that appears trivial to another observer, but it'll knock you, it'll knock it'll pull the rug out from under you. That's what happened to me. And the part about looking at silence, that part is less volitional. I remember my meditational practice after I met Rose. Like Rose advised, like beginner's meditation was, you do some breathing to, you sit, you can. Some people have to walk. You do some breathing exercises to calm the mind down, and then you don't meditate on a mantra or try to concoct peace or like scan the body. I mean, that stuff is not useful in my opinion. You focus on something that is an affliction to the sense of self, because that puts ego in jeopardy. And the idea is not to analyze it, or fix it. It's just that's the part of looking at yourself and looking inside, at in the inner experience or the inner world. Um, and when you do that on a regular basis, that leads to a kind of a habit of, you're able to do that, see yourself in the external world, more objectively than you may have. Most people are so oblivious; they're just not. They're self-absorbed, not self-aware. So with a meditational practice where you kind of look at the things that rub you the wrong way, that have made you fearful or feel vulnerable, or any kind of negative emotion that, like I had an older brother growing up, and I always felt inferior to him. So I kind of had a certain behavioral reactive pattern growing up. I'd be around other people, and I was always shy and intimidated. I was intimidated by other people. So I was sensitive to things that would make me feel bad about myself. Um, well, if you kind of just look at some of those things, not analyze them, not fix them, sometimes you get insights, but it's important to look at them. But what you're doing is not important, which sounds like a contradiction. There's something more important going on, behind the scenes when you do that kind of practice. You're actually turning the attention inward. And it's like kind of when you do that, it's similar to what we talked about, looking at a dream, trying to hang on to a dream to figure out what it means. You can only do that for so long in a meditation. It kind of runs its course, and then you run out of gas. And so when it plays out, then my experience was that a silence would kind of descend, because now I'm not trying to focus my attention, remembering and seeing something in the past. But my attention is still focused. And to me, that was in hindsight, that was the most important part of my meditation. And it had the most value, but it would not have had the same value if it was volitional. If I was consciously trying to generate, I hear a lot of meditational practices where they're trying to generate a sense of peace and tranquility, and I think a lot of people are successful at that. And what they're doing is they're cocooning the ego. The ego's completely, uh, well, it's sleep. It's a form of sleep, and they're not going. Yeah, I don't believe that that sort of meditation. People are not going to wake up. Um,
So when you say look at the afflictions to the individuality self, by looking, to use an example, let's say, just hypothetically speaking, I was at work today and my manager made a comment that inside I kind of bristled at. Hey, I didn't do that. That's not my fault. I was having those kind of reactions. I would call that an affliction to the individuality self, feeling
yeah,
attacked in some way.
yeah,
So you're saying that,
it's a pretty trivial
hey,
one, maybe, but
hey, hey, it felt real to me, buddy.
it's like an onion, right? So it's something that seems really trivial or petty
Mm-hmm.
really is the end of the loose string, or loose thread, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's there's something underneath of it.
So what does it mean to look at it? That means later that day or on the weekend, I think about what happened. Is that what you mean by looking at it? I replay it. What do I do by looking? What does looking at it mean?
Okay, so let's talk about in the context of a sitting meditation versus in a real time context when something's happening in the spur of the moment.
Yeah.
In the spur of the moment, you really can't, unless I mean, most people aren't even y- y- the fact that you were triggered by something like that, um, or maybe there's like a soft spot or a thin part in your skin that's thin, and so somebody, poked you there. Um, you weren't in a mode of your attention was not focused on, well, I'm going to be watching myself and be on the lookout for how I react, sort of thing. You're asleep. You're sleepwalking through your day, so to speak. If you have a regular practice, I mean, it does generate a habit or a momentum, so that sometimes, I mean, I had this experience after, I don't know how many months of like a regular daily practice of sitting for 15, 20, 30 minutes doing this. Next thing I know, that suddenly during the day, well, actually, I have an actual good example of this. So I went to a Rose lecture. I think it might have been the first one when I first ever heard him. And it was like dropping a bomb inside my head. It's like I had to like reshuffle everything in my head. It was really challenging. At the time, I was living with off campus at Kent State, and I had a roommate, and he was older than me, and I moved in with him. I uh, rented, decided to share the place with him because I needed a place and he needed a roommate. I felt dominated by him, and it really irritated me. And Rose talked about, the negative emotions, and these affliction can be a source of energy. So you could turn anger is, when you're angry or irritated with something, there's energy in that. And instead of expending that energy in a and or engaging in an argument real with the other person, or in your mind afterwards, like, oh, what I should have said is blah blah blah, you could take that energy and instead turn it inward and start looking at why did you you're asking yourself questions? Why did I react that way? And so to get back to your question of how do you look at it, it starts by looking at the event and the feeling. Try recalling the feeling without re-experiencing the feeling. If you re-experience the feeling, it's kind of tricky to talk about because the objective is not to relive the experience, right? If you're actually re-experiencing that same emotion, then it's too hot to look at. You're sucked into it again. Um, so that's why Rose always advised looking at things in the past, because if you can look at something that was an age-old trauma of yours or something that's haunted you for years, it loses some of it's cooled off. And so you have a chance of being a little bit, you kind of like just looking at it objectively as if it were another person. If you're looking at a good friend who's having a problem and you're trying to look at, oh yeah, I wonder, so you could see pattern. Oh yeah, Joe, you when people say this to you or when you're in this circumstance, you tend to react the same way, and it really gets you in trouble. It's really counterproductive, and it doesn't show the best side of you. A friend can see that in another person. That person can't see that himself, but he might be able to see that if he looks back into his past at experiences like that. Now, the objective of doing that is not to fix you or, I mean, I know a lot of people, they hear that, think, oh, it sounds like you're talking about psychoanalysis or, like looking at negative emotions or something for trying to fix them. Um, no, it's not about that at all. It's about turning the direction of your attention away from external experience to try to see who is experiencing, who or what is actually seeing. The power to see does not belong to us. Sounds crazy because people who think I'm me, I know I'm me because I've got all these years of building this identity. I have this sense of self, of being who I am, and so that comes from your self-consciousness is born of experience in the body. But what makes it possible is there's something eternal powering it. I almost don't want to go down this path because I wrote. It's better to let people come to their own conclusions. But I guess I'll say it anyway. I use the word. To me, awareness and consciousness are not the same thing. Consciousness is personal and impermanent. Awareness is impersonal and permanent. So you rose within awareness because um, the awareness is your ground, your core being. I'm going to stop there because I want to get back to the story. We can revisit this if you want. So there was this one evening I came. I think it might have been right after a Rose lecture. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I came home to this apartment, and my roommate said something to me about it's like, "Oh, you haven't done the dishes yet." We would take turn doing the dishes or whatever, and there was something about the dishes and the circumstances and the context, and it just infuriated me in that moment. And in that moment, the thought came into my head. I remembered Rose's comment from this lecture about the energy and anger, and instead of and looking at afflictions to the sense of self and that sort of thing. And as soon as that thought came into my head, the anger was just absolutely dissipated, and I got very quiet inside. But I felt this urgency to get out of the house as quick as I could, and I to walk because I needed to. My attention it stopped my head somehow, and I don't know how to describe where my attention was, but it was wholly focused in my inner, looking internally. And I don't know how long I walked, but my mind was racing, and something came of that. I can't articulate it, but it's what at the end of that walk, I would say at the end of that walk, I started my spiritual path and decided to make a commitment to a certain way of life and pursuing something that I thought was reachable. So the important thing is not to figure out the etiology of why you reacted that way. It's like, oh yeah, you had some, your older brother used to do such and so, and you couldn't do anything about it. And so now, 20 years later, when some stranger or coworker does something that reminds you of that, but you're not even conscious of it because what they're doing is an echo. It's like three levels removed from that original psychic injury, if you will. It really rubs you the wrong way, and you don't even know why because it's a couple stages removed. So if you take the bait and just allow yourself to be consumed by whatever emotion that triggers, as opposed to stepping back and looking at what you're experiencing. Doing the latter gives you the possibility of getting deeper into, you might discover what the root cause of that was, and that would be valuable. That would have some value to it. There are some mundane, I would say non-spiritual practical benefits to doing some self-reflection, self-analysis, just looking. But the real value and the important thing that's going on is that you're building an inward momentum of your attention. And if you stick with it and make a commitment to seeing it through to the end, you'll discover what you are. What you are is more appropriate than saying who you are, because who you are as an individual is not your true nature. Your true nature is not an identity.
I have a whole section of the book that's titled Going Within. You talked about it's very difficult for a person to sit down and directly ask a question like, who am I or
Yes.
what am I? And I got the impression that these afflictions to the individuality self are a way that leads you to that
Yes.
question of who am I without actually trying to sit there and go, who am I? And let me look at who I am.
Yeah.
It's sort of
Yeah.
obliquely leading you down that path.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's exactly right. So Ramana Maharshi and I think maybe Nisargadatta are two teachers that, particularly Ramana Maharshi, talked about ask the who am I question. Who am I? Follow the who am I? Or Nisargadatta writes, follow the I am. And I don't say you shouldn't try that. There could be value in that, but like you just suggested, if you think you're going to force, you can't do it directly. You sit there and, like, let's say the question is I want to know and discover my source. Where does this sense of being alive as me right now? Everyone has you feel as that you're alive. Where does that feeling come from? So that would be the who am I question. And you could say, well, what am I? Where does that sense of I emanate from? I don't know anybody. I haven't met anybody. I mean, with the exception of Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta, and those are two people that I've read about, I haven't encountered anybody who has woken up or gotten a final realization by sitting, having a practice where they sit down and they say, who am I? Who am I? Um, but I believe when you look at yourself in the external world and then you look at your inner world, you're you're asking the who am I question, because the attention is in the direction of that, but it's coming, you're looking out of the corner of your eye, so to speak. looking at it obliquely. And that's the thing about um, when you have this habit or momentum of attention looking inward, when life throws something at you that throws you back on yourself, um, instead, you'll have this reaction that instead of taking the bait and getting embroiled in whatever emotion that's going to trigger, you'll your attention will be turned around. Your attention will be looking at the source of who's experiencing that. What is who's experiencing that emotion or that that affliction to the sense of identity. And I think that's about as close as you can get to actually, you know, looking at the who am I question. Seeing, seeing all the way through to your source involves a loss of self. So going within, I think the diagram I have on that in that section, going within the object of the attention, it's even labeled that way. There's uh, there's the experience of going within is experienced as a loss of self, and so in a way, it's kind of like psychological or psychic suicide, ego suicide. Nobody's going to do that. Um, I mean, the people that have committed physical suicide, they've gotten their attention is 180 degrees in the external, focused in the external world. They're not looking inside themselves at all. They're stuck in a depression or a hopelessness, and some of that could be the body itself could be a big factor in that. Depression has there's like the equivalent of a gestalt on the body, a physical pattern of hormones and chemistry and histamines. I read about this years ago, and it's it's a it's so directly it's like a stamp, physical stamp that defines that goes with the depression, and it's so strong that if even if you a person who is no longer in a depression, if some physical circumstances, diet or combination of things actually triggers the same chemistry, body chemistry, and hormones in their body, it'll trigger depression because the two go hand in hand. So it's important to develop a momentum of this attention because to transcend, to abandon the egocentric position, to transcend self, to move beyond self-concern, you can't do it voluntarily. You can't do it volitionally because that involves ego wanting a reward. And so by definition, it's you shut the door on that kind of seeing. So if you're gonna if something's about to pull the rug out from under you and dissolve your identity, you're going to pull back. You're going to spin it, and you'll find some way to look away from it. So you need to have this momentum so that you can't look away. Rose's teaching was absolutely unique. I've never encountered his well, he said that Zen was the similar system. Zen was a system of tension and shocks. But you don't. I've never heard the people that I've heard over the years coming in and out of TAT, and when they talk about Zen, they're talking about something different than that. So Rose is the only person I've ever encountered where in his writings and in his lectures, he harped on lifestyle and taking action. He talked a lot more about action than meditation because the formula, if there's a formula, was was creating tension. You can sit in a chair and meditate, and if that's all you do, he would say you'll puddle. You just turn into a peaceful blob, and there's no great awareness or transcendence going on. You're just you're asleep. So he drove people hard and the matrix that he pushed that for people to be active in was group work, right? So, he was had us going to different college towns, and like I went to Columbus, Ohio. I think I was 19 years old. Go to Columbus and start a group. And so I was living alone, moved to a new city, didn't know anybody. I was probably 20 years old at that point. I mean, it was stressful. It's very stressful to, just on a mundane level, moving to this new place, you don't know anybody, find a place to live, find a job, learn the campus, put up posters, find a place to meet. I was an extremely shy person. I mean, if I got a telephone bill and it had a mistake on it, I would sit by the phone for a ridiculous amount of time getting the nerves to call the operator of the phone company and tell them there was a mistake on my bill. Because that was like, to me, that was a confrontation. It was personal. I was going to confront somebody else and about an issue. That's how eh, crazy, crazy diffident I was. But I forced myself to do this, put up posters and find a meeting place. And then one of my first, actually, the meeting place was my apartment, first meeting. And who shows up? People who are, like 5 and 10 years older than me. So I was super intimidated. But anyway, it generated a lot of tension for me and a lot of energy for meditation. So it just drove the level of the background buzz in my psyche of constantly looking at, oh my God, what is my life about? What am I doing? Where am I going? This was like it was like I was carrying this. You could call it a koan. It was my koan, and it just became something that was with me all the time, and it was tension. And so you combine that tension with, meditational practice. Yeah, and it generates it puts your attention on a certain trajectory. And for me, it was a 20-year trajectory, and it took my giving up on the spiritual path to remove the last obstacle. I mean, I was, because it was basically anyone that's on a spiritual path. It's the motivation is purely selfish. It's a very selfish thing, and so that's an insurmountable block to transcending self. So I had to get to a point where, okay, I'm done trying to add something to myself and become something bigger and better and all that. Then after that, then this momentum of the inward direction of my attention, that started to really go somewhere, for lack of a better way of saying it. I was It took 20 years to get softened up, and then the light started coming on, turning on slowly but surely. So very gradually until suddenly, all in one instant, it just and the story of that, it was when I read that Pullian letter.
Would you say, is there anything in this book that you wish that you had understood when you were 20 years old?
Well, I had Richard Rose as a teacher, so I don't think my book would have been a substitute for me having that. But having had him as a teacher, I like to think that I've learned a few things about how he taught me. And some of that teaching is not, it happens between the words. I made a definite effort in my writing to try to communicate on two levels at the same time. One, on the words you're reading, but I'm going in a certain sequence and saying certain things. And my hope, one of the hopes I have for the books, is that for some people, for the right person who's in the right place, it'll touch something in them, something in me, surrounding me, may, through the vehicle of the words, touch that same thing in another person. Um, and I think I even write in the book, I intend for the book to create both hope and doubt in a person, hope that a deep spiritual realization is possible, and doubt because if they don't have doubt, then they're lost. If they're just so blinded by the experience and they take everything at face value. I mean, if you're going to be in your self-definition project, if you're going to start questioning, well, who exactly am I trying to be in the world, and who have I become so far, and what do I want to become, and why do I want to become that? What is it? What is it? Where did that come from? I didn't decide that I wanted something. I just came to recognize I want something. So we don't our desires are more, it's more a case of them being imposed on us from external sources, whether that external source is the body or the environment, than a case of where we sat down and we decided to think about, well, what do we want? And I mean, people do that and they do come up with answers, but it begs the question, well, so something popped in your head is what you said you want, but where did that come from? Yeah, so you have to have I had a lot of doubts on my own path, and that was a form of a fuel. So yeah, so hopefully it's particularly in the section on the 12 stages of life, that was where I really, and I tried hard. It was challenging writing for me to write in the tense, the verb tense where you're talking directly to somebody, because as opposed to like documentation or third person narration. So hopefully it will inspire them that, yeah, I feel something's coming through. I feel like this is real, and there's something that's worth pursuing, that's beyond the mundane world, and at the same time to generate doubt about the world you're living in now.
Yeah, I will definitely say that. In certain sections of the book, I can tell when you're kind of talking about fairly practical things, or you're giving an overview of, for example, the stages of life section. You're painting this picture, but then I can tell that it's like the tone shifts and you start speaking directly to me as a reader.
Yeah,
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 that definitely comes across in sections of the book.
yeah. I stopped trying to do that as much when I got to that, when I finished the 12 stages of life and then moved on to the going within section. Then that became a little bit more professorial, is not the right word. It's the word that pops into my head right now.
Well, it's just that's just practical to me. Like you give a lot of examples of going within and meditation and
Well,
yeah.
that was the other thing in the book. I decided, when I would in talks that I've given, I feel like too many of them were too abstract. And in the book, I tried to give
Hmm.
more examples, translate whatever point I'm making and weave it into a story, or give examples that illustrate the point.
I know one question I had for you is that you referred to the daily examination of conscience, and I still when I read it, I think that oh he means consciousness. No, he
Oh,
means conscience. Could you just
oh, yeah. Well, I felt,
unwrap that a little more?
yeah, I guess, well, that comes from my Catholic upbringing. I mean, conscience is not a Catholic concept per se, but I went to a parochial school, grade school, grades, 1 through 8, and the Catholic Church, the church is all about, sin and forgiveness. We're all sinners, and we have to go to confession and receive the sacraments to have our sins forgiven and become more Christ-like, and it's part of a spiritual path and all that. So the side effect of teaching us that we were all sinners was to also teach guilt. You feel guilty when you sin. And so you unload your guilt by going to confession and all that. But along the way in the catechism classes, Um, they they talked about, or they got the teaching across that wanting to be something, wanting to be more Christ-like wasn't enough. You couldn't just want something. You had to actually take action. And they talked about the actions that you would take, but then you had to check yourself. You had to evaluate how you doing on this project. Are you actually doing what you said you were going to do? And that's one level of conscience, checking it yourself. But I don't know how it came to be, but somehow in my childhood, my parents taking me to Mass, Catholic Mass, that was back when it was in Latin and the altar faced the cross, not the audience. And I was very it stirred up a lot of emotions in me. The ceremony about it, it's hard to explain, but and then so between that and catechism in school and whatnot, I kind of developed this. Oh, there was I was taught we were taught to say nightly prayers. You wouldn't every night before bedtime you'd say your prayers. So for me, that became the time of my day when I would reflect. So examination of conscience is self-reflection. And on a daily basis, it's reflecting on who were you that day? What kind of person were you? And then maybe if you realize that, oh my gosh, I wasn't a very good person today. Well, then why? Why? Why did what did I do that was not so good? And why did I do that? So it's just a form of self-reflection. Um, but I would say that it's always with a mind of checking to see if you were being true to yourself. Yeah, that's what I should have said that earlier on. I remember as a child, I used to in my nightly prayers like when I was maybe 8, 9, 10, that age frame, and my kids in my neighborhood, my older brother, when I saw kids become adolescents, I saw they seem to lose themselves. There's something about them. They became disconnected in some way that I sensed. And I remember I used to pray to God to always to keep me true, close to Him and true to myself. Don't let me lose myself like I could somehow sense that these other people were losing themselves. I mean, child, you don't have a lot of concepts, so you're not thinking in detailed abstractions, but that's the feeling I had. So yeah, examination of conscience, daily check to see are you living your life true to yourself. That would be the simplest way to say it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, you mentioned the diagrams in the book, and I just wanted to emphasize to people that I believe it's four different diagrams, all quite detailed. And the nice thing is that you have some explanatory text to go along with them. So if you're more of a visual person, I think there's a different way of communicating that I think some
Yeah,
people have see the value in those and appreciate seeing those diagrams.
well, that was the idea. I mean, I'm a visual person. I tend to think visually. I think visually first, and then the challenge becomes how do I translate that visual thinking into words, and that can be challenging. There's a few diagrams in there that I don't say too much about because it's too hard to translate those into words.
You mentioned hope and doubt, and I just wanted to read this sentence from the beginning of the introduction. It said, I intend for this book to inspire in you both hope and doubt. Hope that a deep spiritual realization is possible for you. Doubt, because without doubt, you are completely blind and cannot see your imprisonment or distinguish between what you are and what you are not. I hope that was a lot of truth in that line. One thing that came up on the doubt front in one of our Bay Area meetings a couple weeks ago is somebody expressed the frustration of it's kind of that idea of like, well, the ego can't let go of itself. It can't forget itself. Um, and here I am again, just stuck in this place of my mind can't escape my mind, and that's depressing. And so my question would be, when you come to that place, like, I guess I'm just saying, the spiritual path is frustrating and can be depressing, and because of the doubt, because yeah, you have this hope that you could discover something, but all along it's like one is being attacked by this doubt. Like everything I think I know may not be true. I'm subject to my moods, and I'm powerless.
Yeah, Rose Rose said, he said you should doubt everything, you should doubt him, but the one thing you should never doubt is that your ability to find an answer, which, it's one thing to say that to somebody, but like you just pointed out, if you're filled with doubts, um, or if you have a certain level of doubt, it's hard not to have that same doubt shine on your very your spiritual path. Doubt, question what you're doing. But you know what? That's part of the formula too, Sean. And I would say people say that they're depressed because ultimately you have to give up. And you can't cheat the system by saying, okay, I give up. Now wake me up, give me enlightenment. But you have to give up at some point. And so that doubt plays a role, and it's part of the formula. But when somebody says they're depressed, I'm thinking, oh, come on, like you're probably not really. It's kind of a distraction. You might be frustrated, but it's kind of a form of, oh dear, you know what? How long am I going to have to work at this? I want to get the answer within a year so I can go back to playing all the games in life that I had in play before I discovered this spiritual path nonsense. And it's like, oh, woe is me. It's like, I don't know if I can do this for my whole life. Well, sometimes people need to take a break. And you know what? People that need to take a break will take a break whether they decide to take one or not. It's like I came to the conviction a long time ago, long before my realization, that basically everybody is already doing exactly what they want. And so just ignore what they say
Hmm.
and look at what they do.
Yeah.
And it's on balance. It's like things have found a certain stasis. Everybody's got cognitive dissonance. They want opposing things. But how badly do they, maybe they want something 50.5%, and but the other thing that is in contradiction to that, they want 49.5%. So they don't want to they want it all. They don't want to give up either thing. But eventually they'll say, okay, I'd rather they drift in towards one or the other. And there's a zillion of those things. And in the constellation of all that, I think people somehow find a certain stasis that they can fall asleep and, be happy, be, peaceful and happy, which is why Rose constantly confronted us, not like the confrontation groups at TAP, which are, when we have at those retreats, when they have a confrontation session, they tend to be, they challenge your thinking and challenge your beliefs, challenge what are you doing. Rose challenged us on a much more mundane level. It's like, when are you going to get off your ass and go, move, move around instead of sitting around reading a book all day. Get out there and get some exercise. There's the steps are rotting. The steps need to be built or repaired. Get out and do things. Physical. It's really important to work on a physical level. And he had all this stuff down in like distilled to single pages of charts, like the path is a threefold path, the way, the truth, and the life. And then you need to work on a physical, a mental, and a spiritual level, and all the different things like that. And the value of that is the attention. your attention follows your actions. So action. There's nothing inherently spiritual, or you're not earning temporary indulgences, as opposed to the plenary indulgence in the Catholic Church. I used to buy holy cards to earn those things instead of taking action. I could go feed the poor, or I could purchase a holy card for 50 cents and get an indulgence. Um, but if you take action, uh, it has an impact on your attention. So that's the value of action, not necessarily in the action itself, but in the effect it has on your attention. And so when I was putting up posters in Columbus, Ohio for announcing a group meeting or a spiritual group meeting, where's my attention? My attention was on the problem. The problem being ultimately like what's the answer to the who am I question? What's the answer to where did I come from? Who am I and where am I going? Birth, life, and death. So maybe not in those terms or in that level of detail, but the act of putting up those posters was a form of keeping my attention on the problem. And so Rose was constantly challenging us in ways that would make sure that our attention didn't get pulled by gravity into mundane, I can't think of the word right now, but how long does it take when you get a group of guys in particular, maybe a group of any people, but guys especially, just chit-chatting? How many certain times around the conversation circles does it take for the conversation to kind of just drift down until now suddenly it's all sexual jokes, or dark humor, gutter jokes. Maybe sports will precede that, but we've all had that experience. Well, that says something about the impact the body has on the attention. So he was constantly challenging us to, okay, no, don't look at that. Look at this.
And you suggested, I think it was in the going within section when you were talking about meditation, that meditation by itself is not enough, that you actually do need to make some kind of commitment to action, to doing things. I guess absent a spiritual teacher telling you, hey, you need to go out and fix these steps or start a group. Could I pick something like, would any kind of commitment be something that would be an action that would possibly bring about material for inquiry, let's say, or
Mm.
turn my attention within? If I look at, well, what happened when I decided that I was gonna, I don't know, I was gonna commit to taking the dog for a walk every day at noon.
Yeah.
It's something,
Well,
it's on its face, it's totally mundane. It has nothing to do with a spiritual practice. I'm just saying I'm going to take this action every day.
yeah. Well, okay. So what you commit to matters. I mean, you could commit to wanting to make $1 million. You could commit to wanting to um, have a certain kind of physique, and you're willing to pay the price for those two commitments. Different people, different commitments. Um, and then sure, if you're by nature an introspective kind of person, you might notice along the way that, well, I said I wanted this physique, but I'm not going to get it if I don't lift my weights at least 3 times a week and avoid the ice cream sandwiches every evening, sort of thing. And you think, well, yeah, why did? So if you're really introspective, you might say, yeah, what's with that? What's behind that? Why do I do that? I don't think about it. I just kind of drift into it. But the odds are that's not what's going to happen when the commitment is to have a certain physique or make $1 million. You're going to the heart of the commitment is maybe the more opportunity there is for you to learn something about yourself, but it's not really good. The direction of your attention is not going to be all that much inward. So it's the conscious commitment to, and maybe you have to get a taste of it somewhere along the way. I mean, for me, I was raised Catholic, and but I knew nothing about esoteric philosophy or Zen and all. This notion of there being some transcendental experience. And we heard about the saints, and I knew there was some people called mystics. But to me, it just meant that they were holy people, and they just did, they just did what all of us other Catholics were doing, only they did it a lot better and more seriously. They joined a monastery and did it day and night, all day long, instead of, having a normal life in a family.
So it sounds like the action then, it would be more fruitful if one's actions were something along the lines of, I'm gonna, do some journal writing every day, or I'm going to every day have a daily examination of conscience. Like I'm going to do that thing. That's the kind of action that's more fruitful.
Commit to doing something that's hard, or commit to doing and more than just hard, do something that commit to doing something. And if you want to talk about like lower forms of commitment, or not lower, but less, more concrete and practical,
Yeah.
do something that challenges your natural tendencies. For
Mm.
example,
Mm.
I took at one point in my life, I took a job I worked to get a job as an estimator for a printing company, because I decided that my type of mind was too dreamy, too undisciplined. I would daydream a lot, and my first year in college, I smoked a lot of pot, and I think that clouded my head. Anyway, I just decided that math never came easy to me, and so I decided, well, I got to get a job. Well, I can kill two birds with one stone. I'll get a job and make a living, and I'll do something that is kind of challenges my mind. So, and it did. So doing numbers was it's kind of a small thing, but I remember Rose once told a person who was just so. This was, I think he was a college professor. I mean, he was of that age. He was a young man, but he was graduated from college, but he was so withdrawn in his own shell, so to speak. Rose told him, "You know what you need to do? You need to go down the street and punch a cop in the nose. Do something really radical." I mean, he obviously he didn't. He was speaking half figuratively, but he thought the guy should do something just so out of character that would shake up his state of mind, bust up that. Rose talked a lot about states of mind, and um, I don't know that I present it in the same language, but in the 12 stages of life in the book, the idea that you're stuck in a certain state of mind is woven in there. When you're in a certain state of mind, you're looking it's like wearing rose-colored glasses. You're seeing the world through a with a certain perception, but also from a certain conviction state. You think you are a certain way, and the world is a certain way. And somebody else could look at you and, see you more objectively, and you can't see yourself that way. So it's good to shake up your state of mind, and challenging yourself would do that. Even just like moving, not that, moving could be running away from things and avoidance and all that, but sometimes just moving to a completely different city is a good way to shake up your state of mind and get yourself out of a mental rut. I mean, that was an issue for me when I was young and single, in my 20s, and I had a lot of angst up until my realization. And moving around I moved a lot. I never had a job for more than 2 years. One job I had, I made sure to stay a few extra months just so I could have at least one job in my resume that I was actually at for 2 years instead of 1 year and 6 months or something. That's not maybe that isn't a good thing for everybody to do, just move around for the sake of moving around. But
Yeah. Well, that reminded me of one other point that I wanted to make about the book is that I thought you did a nice job. There's a essay in the back. In the back, you have several short pieces of writing, many of which I would say are inspirational, but you have one called, I believe it's Dear Aging Becomer.
Oh,
And I thought you did a nice job of like touching people at different stages of life with the book. And that one is definitely aimed towards people who may be more along in years and as well as along in years in terms of their spiritual path. That was a powerful piece, I thought. So good
well,
book all around. It's called Hope, Life's Calling, subtitled Finding Yourself on the Spiritual Path Called Life.
which obviously is another one of those play on words or double entendre. Because my belief is that everyone is on a spiritual path, more or less. I mean, some people are completely oblivious to it, and I had a retired psychiatrist whom I'm friends with recently, who looked at the book, and he said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. Not everybody is not everybody's looking for spirituality. I mean, are you kidding me? Most people are. They could care less about it. They read your book and think you're crazy or something. But cliche, Joe Sixpack. You say, well, he's not on a spiritual path. Well, he's just kind of lost in life. He hasn't found himself. He's trying to find himself on some very coarse, mundane level, make his way in the world, build an identity, take care of himself. So in that sense, is he's trying to define himself and find himself. But there's an inner part of him that he's not conscious of, but he's not immune from it either. He's not that other part of him is always with him. It's wrong to use that language, a part of him. It's his essence. It's at his core. It's what he is, and what holds him in this life. And at some point in his life, maybe on his deathbed, some experience draws him a little bit, turns his attention a little bit of away from the mirror, I call it, the mundane life that he's so desperately trying to see himself in. It causes him to look away from that in at something deeper, and he's not even conscious of it. I think everybody has some moments like that in their lives, but they don't have any kind of framework or momentum, if you will, to pay much attention to it. And they're so embroiled in their everyday lives that they don't pursue it. You might wonder, well, why is it that some people like yourself, why did you and I follow the path that we did, and some people just they think we're nuts. Like, why would you waste your time doing something like that? Why aren't you more concerned about who's going to be in the Super Bowl? I don't know. It's I those kind of questions. I think about a rose bush. We had all these rose bushes in one of the yards in my houses, and this thing would have a gazillion buds on it. It was this gorgeous bush, and it was so large. It grew. The environment grew and covered different lighting conditions and different, probably maybe even soil conditions. But anyway, there are countless bloom buds on this thing, and some of them didn't open. Some of them opened halfway. All of them eventually turned brown and fell off, whether they opened or not. And none of that mattered to the rose bush or changed the nature of the rose bush. I mean, maybe it seems like a silly metaphor, but every one of those buds was an offshoot of that central living thing. And so that's how I see the people on it. So I think everybody hopes to find themselves in life. Everybody. They just don't think of their life as being a spiritual path. They don't, the majority of people don't think of, other than, a lot of people are into churchianity and, belief system but that's just part of like this self-preservation thing, or motivation. The body being programmed to protect itself and avoid death. The ego wanting to grow and protect itself and avoid death. The escape for that is like, well, there's an afterlife. It's not that hard to earn one. You just got to join a church, go to church, and you can live a normal life and have all the fun you want and do all the things. But you got to be a halfway decent human being, and then don't worry about it until they're someone very close and dear to them goes through a horrible illness or Alzheimer's and dies, and then it really throws them back on themselves, and then they start to really question and then if they get too uncomfortable with where that's going, they have to look away from it. How do they look away from it? Oh, they start chanting prayers. They turn the attention away from something deeper and inner back to something external.
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate your time this evening. It's been nice speaking with you. I just want to remind everybody again that you'll be at the upcoming April TAP meeting, April 25th through 27th. You can visit tatfoundation.org to find out more about that. I know 9 years ago, I listened to our interview from 9 years ago, and you said that you don't have a website. This is your first book, which I'm super glad that you got out into the world. You said years ago that you liked getting letters from people as your primary form of interaction. Would you still say that that's the case?
Yes,
Yeah.
I feel like it's a very effective form of communication, even though it's not face to face, because I find with a letter, when you read a letter, I mean, this is my experience. I think it's true for a lot of people. When you read a letter, especially one that you're holding in your hands, like in the old days, you hear the other person's voice inside your head. Or it's like it's
Mhm.
very intimate. It's almost more intimate than because you're not distracted by physical appearance and body language and movement. You're totally focused on their voice. And the same was true when they wrote the letter. It was all putting their voice on paper, and then you hear their voice in your mind when you're reading it. So I think and well, in conversation, you can really dodge and bob and weave and go off tangents. But when you're writing, I mean, well, if you're trying to write well, as opposed to just like write whatever, in random fashion and scattered writing, you have to you have to think about what you want to say. And then it's it's objectified too. So as soon as you write it, you see what you said, and then this doesn't happen so much in a conversation. You realize that, well, no, that's not what I meant to say, or maybe it even makes you maybe you could say something completely different because then you realize, oh, why did it's almost it's almost like an exercise when you write a letter, especially if you're writing a letter to somebody to talk about these kinds of matters. It's almost like a meditation exercise.
Well, given that, I'll just tell people that if you're interested in reaching out to Bob, just go to spiritualteachers.org, fill out the contact, just contact me, and I'll get in touch with Bob and see if some correspondence comes from that. Well, all right, Bob. I just wanted to say again, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate the effort that went into the book and the things that you do to help other people on their path. And just wish you the best.
Well, thanks, Sean, and I want to thank you for doing this interview, and thank the people who take the time to listen to it. And I'd like to say to them, my wish for them is that they see clearly, understand what they see, and live their understanding.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Journals of Spiritual Discovery. I'm your host, Sean Nevins. For more information about today's guest, as well as more interviews, books, and other resources, go to spiritualteachers.org. That's spiritualteachers.org.